They are beating my mama!
Who? Where are they?
In the other room, please!
Okay, stay here.
Get away from! I won't lay! You have no choice! Please, no.
She ran as if the shadows of the estate had finally come to life to swallow her whole. Small, scuffed patent leather shoes thundering against the polished marble, her white dress fluttering like a broken wing. Tears streaming so thick they blurred the golden glow of the chandeliers. And her eyes? Her large, dark brown eyes were wide with a terror no 6-year-old should know, the kind born from watching the person you love most hit the floor. A child, a blur of white and deep brown skin, sprinting across a grand gala filled with Seoul's most ruthless elite. She didn't run for the security guards lining the walls. She didn't run for the kitchen where the other staff hid. She ran straight for the head table. She ran to the man everyone else spent their lives trying to avoid, the Ice King, the man whose name was used to quiet unruly children and nervous investors alike. Kang-Jun, 36 years old, obsidian suit, a razor-sharp jawline and a face that looked like it had been carved from stone, incapable of shifting into a smile. His hair was slicked back, jet black and perfect, reflecting the cold light of the room. He didn't move. He didn't even blink. He just sat there with a crystal glass of amber liquid held in a hand that never shook. He was the settled center of a storm, a man so dangerous he didn't need to raise his voice to be heard. And then a 6-year-old girl with a crown of natural curls grabbed his silk jacket with both hands, staining the expensive fabric with her tears. She looked up at him with a raw, desperate trust, the kind of look that bypasses a man's reputation and speaks directly to his soul. Her voice cracked the silence of the room like a gunshot. "Please," she sobbed. "They're beating my mama." Pause for 2 seconds. The ballroom didn't just go silent. It stopped breathing. 100 of the most powerful people in the country froze mid-sip, mid-sentence. They stared because they couldn't understand why this child had chosen the monster to be her savior. Kang-Jun set his glass down. The clink of the crystal against the table sounded like a gavel. Slowly, he turned his head toward the entrance of the servants' corridor. There stood Hee-jin, his fiancée, clad in diamonds, her face a mask of practiced innocence that was starting to crack at the edges. Her breathing was heavy, her knuckles slightly red. In that heartbeat, the temperature in the Sky estate dropped 20 degrees. Every guest realized that Hee-jin hadn't just crossed a servant. She had unknowingly declared war on something Kang-Jun had been quietly keeping in his heart. The Ice King was looking at his bride-to-be, and for the first time in her life, Hee-jin realized she had no idea what he was capable of. To understand how a strawberry candy led to the destruction of a dynasty, you have to go back 7 weeks to a quiet garden and a secret treaty. The Sky Estate did not just sit on top of the hill. It looked down on the rest of Seoul, like a king made of diamonds. Everything inside was made of glass, marble, and secrets. It was a place where the air felt thin and expensive, and where the floor was polished so bright that you could see your own nervous face staring back at you. This was a world of Kang-Jun, a man who lived a fortress of perfect silence. Kang-Jun moved through his home like a shadow in a black suit. He was 36 years old, but his eyes looked much older, like deep wells that had seen things no one should ever talk about. He didn't speak unless he had to. He didn't smile. He just watched. Every morning, the house ran with the speed of a high-tech machine. The guards stood like statues at the doors. The chef prepared meals that looked more like art than food. Everyone knew the first rule of the Sky Estate. Do not make a sound, and never get in the master's way. But even a machine has parts that no one sees. In the quiet corners of the mansion, behind the heavy oak doors and under the sweeping staircases, were the ghosts. Nia was the most important ghost of all. She was a tall woman with gentle hands and a tired smile that she only showed when the rooms were empty. Her job was to keep the perfection perfect. She wiped the dust off the crystal vases and made sure there wasn't a single smudge on the floor-to-ceiling windows. She was a black woman in a world of pale marble, moving with a quiet strength that made her almost invisible to the rich people who visited. She knew exactly how Kang-Jun liked his coffee, burning hot, no sugar, and she knew which rooms to stay out of when his face looked like a brewing storm. Then there was Zuri. At 6 years old, Zuri was the only splash of color in the gray and white fortress. With her big, fluffy afro puffs and her bright white dress, She looked like a small cloud drifting through a cave. Zuri wasn't supposed to be seen. While her mother worked, Zuri usually sat in the service alcove or under a large table in the library, hidden by the long velvet cloth. Zuri didn't find the mansion scary. To her, it was a giant puzzle. She spent her days watching the Ice King from her hiding spots. She noticed things the grown-ups missed. She saw how Kang-Jun's hand would pause for a second before he signed a paper. She saw how he always sat at the very edge of his chair, like he was ready to run. And she saw the bowl of strawberry candies on his desk that he never seemed to eat. In this world of glass, Nia and Zuri were the heartbeat that no one listened for. They lived in the spaces between the master's footsteps. Nia worked to give her daughter a future, and Zuri played in the shadows, waiting for a chance to show the man in the black suit that even a fortress needs a little bit of light. They were the invisible ones, but they were the only ones who truly knew the man who owned the sky. The bond between a king and a ghost does not start with a conversation. It starts with a small, red wrapper. It happened on a Tuesday. The Sky Estate was silent, as usual. Kang-Jun was sitting at his massive desk, his eyes fixed on a computer screen that showed numbers and graphs. He looked like he was made of stone. Zuri was hiding behind a heavy velvet curtain in the corner of his office. Her mother, Nia, was polishing the long hallway outside, and Zuri had slipped inside when the guards weren't looking. She was bored, and her pockets were full of the strawberry candy she loved. She watched Kang-Jun from the shadows. He looked lonely. Slowly, she crept out from behind the curtain. She didn't say a word. She reached out her small, brown hand and placed a single strawberry candy on the edge of his polished desk. Then, like a puff of smoke, she vanished back behind the curtain. Kang-Jun didn't move for a long time. He stared at the bright red candy. It looked strange sitting there against expensive black wood. He looked at the curtain, then back at the candy. With a hand that usually signed orders that moved millions of dollars, he reached out. He unwrapped the candy and popped it into his mouth. It was sweet and cheap, a taste from a world he didn't belong to. The next day, when Zuri returned to her hiding spot, the strawberry candy was gone. In its place was a small, blue wrapper. It was a blueberry candy, the expensive kind that came from the private kitchen. Zuri smiled so wide her cheeks hurt. She took the candy and left a small drawing in its place, a quick sketch of a dragon with a very long tail. This became their secret treaty. It was a world made of sugar and paper. Every afternoon, Zuri would leave a candy or a drawing. Sometimes it was a picture of a cat with 5 legs. Sometimes it was a drawing of the tall glass buildings she saw from the windows. In return, Kang-Jun would leave something for her, a gold-wrapped chocolate, a small silver bell. Once, he even left a professional drawing pencil. They never spoke. They never even looked each other in the eye. But the Ice King was changing. The household staff began to notice it first. Mr. Han, the head of security, noticed that Kang-Jun's jaw wasn't as tight as it used to be. The maids whispered in the kitchen about how the master had stopped shouting when the coffee was 2 degrees too cold. Even the guards at the door noticed that his dark eyes seemed a little less like frozen glass. He was becoming less sharp. He was still powerful, and he was still the boss, but the hard edges of his soul were being sanded down by a 6-year-old girl. Kang-Jun started coming home earlier. He would sit at his desk and wait for the slight rustle of the curtain. He found himself looking forward to the drawings more than the business reports. He didn't know it yet, but the ghost in the white dress was doing something no enemy had ever been able to do. She was making him feel safe in his own home. And for a man like Kang-Jun, feeling safe was the most dangerous thing of all. The peace of the Sky Estate was shattered when a white sports car roared up the driveway. Out stepped Hee-Jean, the woman who was supposed to become Kang-Jun's wife. She moved like a queen who had never been told no. Her clothes were expensive, her hair was perfect, and her eyes were as cold as the marble floors. She didn't come alone. She brought wedding planners, designers, and a mountain of luggage. Within an hour, her loud voice was echoing through the halls, breaking the quiet that Zuri and Kang-Jun had built. Hee-Jean saw the mansion as a prize she had finally won. She spent her days walking through the rooms, pointing at things she wanted to change. She wanted new curtains, new lights, and most of all, new people. To her, The Sky Estate was a stage where she would be the star, and anything that didn't look perfect had to go. It didn't take long for her to notice the ghosts. She first saw Zuri in the East Garden. Zuri was sitting on a bench, her tongue pressed between her teeth as she finished a drawing for the desk. She was wearing her favorite, white dress, and her fluffy curls were bouncing as she worked. To anyone else, it was a sweet sight. To Hee-jin, it was a stain on the estate's prestige. She stopped in her tracks, her face twisting into a look of deep disgust. Why is there a child playing in the middle of my garden? Hee-jin snapped. She didn't look at Zuri. She looked at the head of security, Mr. Han. She is a housekeeper's daughter, miss. Mr. Han answered, his voice low. She is very quiet. She causes no trouble. Hee-jin laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. This isn't a playground. It's a world-class estate. I won't have the help's children running around like they own the place. It looks messy. It looks cheap. From that moment on, a dark shadow fell over Zuri and Nia. Hee-jin didn't just ask them to leave. She began a campaign of subtle cruelty. She would wait until Kang-Jun was away on business, and then she would strike. She started by ordering Nia to work double shifts, making her clean the same rooms over and over until her back ached. She would accidentally spill red wine on a rug Nia had just finished scrubbing, only to smile and say, "Oops, you missed a spot." But she saved her sharpest words for Zuri. Whenever she saw the girl, she would make a comment about her messy hair or her simple clothes. She would tell Zuri that the Ice King hated noise and that every time Zuri moved, he grew more annoyed. She told the little girl that she was only allowed to stay because of his pity, not because she belonged there. Zuri began to feel the weight of that shadow. She stopped humming while she drew. She started to hide even deeper behind the curtains, her large brown eyes full of a new kind of worry. She noticed that her mother looked more tired every night, her golden skin looking gray from exhaustion. Hee-jin was like a cold wind that was slowly blowing out all the light in the mansion. Zuri still left the strawberry candies on the desk. But now, she did it with shaking hands, wondering if the Ice King really did find her presence a stain on his perfect world. The heat of the afternoon sun moved slowly across the East Garden, but Zuri felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. She was sitting on her favorite stone step, her notebook open on her knees. This was her most important drawing yet. It wasn't just a dragon or a flower. It was a portrait of the Ice King himself. She had used her best pencils to get the sharp line of his jaw just right, and she had even added a small strawberry candy in his hand. It was her way of saying thank you for the secret gifts. She was so focused that she didn't hear the clicking of high heels on the marble path. By the time she looked up, the sunlight was blocked by a tall, thin shadow. Hee-jin stood over her, looking down with eyes that seemed to hate everything they saw. "What do you have there?" Hee-jin asked. Her voice was sweet like honey, but it felt like a trap. Before Zuri could move, Hee-jin reached down and snatched the notebook from her small hands. Zuri stood up, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Please, Mississippi, that's mine." Hee-jin didn't listen. She flipped through the pages, her lip curling in disgust as she saw the drawings of the mansion, the staff, and finally, the portrait of Kang-Jun. A harsh, mean laugh escaped her throat. "You think you know him? You think a child like you belongs in his world." "It's just a gift," Zuri whispered, her voice trembling. Hee-jin's face changed. The fake sweetness vanished, replaced by a cold, hard anger. "He doesn't want your gifts. He doesn't even want to see your face. You are a bug in his palace, Zuri, a messy, unimportant little bug." Then, slowly and with a cruel smile, Hee-jin gripped the edges of the notebook. With a loud, jagged rip, she tore the portrait of Kang-Jun in half. Then she tore it again and again, until the beautiful drawing was nothing but scraps of white paper fluttering to the grass. Zuri felt as if her own heart was being torn apart. Tears welled up in her large eyes, making the world look blurry and bright. Hee-jin stepped closer, leaning down until she was inches from Zuri's face. The smell of her expensive perfume was thick and choking. "Let me tell you a secret, little girl," she hissed. "Kang-Jun is a king, my king, and you? You are nothing but the dirt on his shoes. If I see you near his office again, I will make sure you and your mother are thrown out onto the street where you belong." Do you understand? Zuri couldn't speak. She could only nod quickly, her breath coming in short, jagged gasps. Hee-Jean dropped the empty cover of the notebook onto the pile of torn paper and walked away, her heels clicking a steady victory beat against a stone. Zuri knelt on the ground, her small fingers reaching for the pieces of her work. She tried to fit them back together, but they were too small and the edges were too jagged. She realized then that the Ice King's fortress was no longer a puzzle to be solved. It was a cage and the bars were closing in. She stayed there for a long time, a small girl in a white dress, surrounded by the ruins of her art, learning the hardest lesson of all, that sometimes even a dragon isn't strong enough to protect a dream. The Sky Estate felt different now. The air was thick and heavy, like the moments right before a thunderstorm. Nia tried her best to act like everything was fine. She would hum a little tune while she folded the silk sheets, or tell Zuri funny stories about the birds in the garden. She wanted to build a wall of safety around her daughter, but walls made of stories are easy to see through. Zuri was only 6, but she was an expert at watching. She noticed that her mother didn't hum as much as she used to. She saw the way Nia's shoulders stayed hunched up toward her ears, as if she were waiting for a blow to land. Most of all, Zuri saw her mother's hands. When Nia reached out to give Zuri a cup of juice or to tie her shoes, her fingers would shake just a little bit. These were the invisible bruises left by Hee-Jean's constant cruelty. One night, in their small room in the service wing, Zuri sat on the edge of the bed. She watched her mother rub her sore wrists. Nia had spent the last 4 hours scrubbing a staircase that was already spotless because Hee-Jean claimed she saw a speck of dust. "Mama," Zuri whispered, "is the mean lady going to make us go away?" Nia froze for a second. She took a deep breath and forced a smile onto her face, though it didn't reach her tired eyes. She reached out and smoothed Zuri's fluffy curls. "Don't you worry about that, baby. Mr. Kang-Jun is a fair man. We just have to do our work and stay out of sight. Everything will be okay." But Nia's hands were still shaking. Zuri knew then that her mother was afraid. The mansion that used to feel like a giant puzzle now felt like a dark forest full of traps. However, they were not entirely alone. The rest of the staff had seen what was happening. They saw the way Hee-Jean treated Nia like an object and Zuri like a mistake. A silent resistance began to grow among the people who wore the gray uniforms. It was a secret war fought with kindness. Mr. Park, the head of security, started standing near the servants' entrance whenever Hee-Jean was nearby, his large shadow acting as a shield for Nia. Hannah, the cook, began hiding extra treats in Zuri's napkins, warm rolls with butter or small cups of chocolate pudding. The junior cleaners would whisper clear when they saw Hee-Jean heading to a room where Nia was working, giving her time to finish and leave. Even the silent guard at the office door started to look the other way. When Zuri crept toward the Ice King's desk, they knew about the Strawberry Treaty. They knew that the little girl in the white dress was the only thing keeping the mansion from turning completely into ice. But the kindness of the staff couldn't stop the storm that was coming. Hee-Jean was growing more impatient. She wanted Nia and Zuri gone before the wedding, and she was tired of waiting for them to make a mistake. She decided that if she couldn't find a reason to fire them, she would create one. Zuri watched from the shadows, her heart heavy. She saw the Ice King through his office window, but he seemed so far away now. The silent bond they had built was being tested by a shadow that was growing larger every single day. The night of the grand gala arrived like a cold, sharp blade. The Sky Estate was filled with the sounds of violins and the chatter of people who wore diamonds like armor. Outside, the city lights twinkled, but inside the servants' wing, the air was thick and silent. Nia was dressed in her crispest uniform, her hands moving fast as she prepped the last of the silver trays. Zuri stayed close to the wall, her white dress tucked around her knees, trying to be as invisible as a ghost. "Stay here, Zuri," Nia whispered, her voice tight with worry. "The house is full of important people tonight. Do not move from this spot." Zuri nodded, but her stomach felt like it was full of cold stones. She watched her mother walk down the long, narrow corridor toward the service elevator. The hallway was dim, lit only by a few flickering wall lights. Suddenly, a figure stepped out from the shadows of a storage room. It was Hee-Jean. She was wearing a dress of pure gold that shimmered in the dark, but her face was twisted with an ugly, dark anger. She didn't look like a bride. She looked like a hunter. "I told you to leave," He-Jin hissed, her voice echoing off the narrow walls. "I told you I didn't want your daughter's face staining this house during my gala." Nia stopped, pulling her shoulders back. "I am doing my job, Mississippi. We have nowhere else to go tonight." "You are a plague," He-Jin snapped. She stepped closer, her expensive perfume filling the small space. "You think because the master is soft on your child that you are safe? You are nothing. And tonight, I am finishing this." Zuri watched from the end of the hall, her breath catching in her throat. She saw He-Jin reach out and grab Nia's arm, her long nails digging into her mother's skin. Nia tried to pull away, her face pale with shock. "Let go of me, please," Nia begged. "Don't you ever turn your back on me." He-Jin screamed. In a flash of gold silk, He-Jin raised her hand and shoved Nia with all her strength. It happened in slow motion. Nia's shoes slipped on the polished floor. She let out a small, sharp cry as she fell backward, her shoulder slamming into the hard stone wall before she hit the ground. She didn't get up. She stayed there, cradling her arm, her eyes wide with pain and fear. He-Jin stood over her, breathing hard. She didn't look sorry. She looked satisfied. "Get your things and get out," she whispered. "If you are still here when the sun comes up, I'll have the police remove you." Zuri felt a scream building in her chest, but she choked it back. She looked at her mother on the floor, then at the cruel woman in the gold dress. She realized then that the silent resistance of the staff wasn't enough. The guards couldn't help them now. Her mother's shaking hands couldn't save them. There was only one person in the entire world who had the power to stop the shadows. Zuri looked toward the heavy doors that led to the grand ballroom. She thought of the strawberry candies and the dragon drawings. She thought of the Ice King sitting at the center table. She turned and began to run. She ran because her mother couldn't. She ran because the fortress was falling. And the only hope left was a man everyone else was too afraid to touch. The heavy oak doors of the grand ballroom felt like the gates to another world. Zuri didn't stop to think. She pushed them open with all her strength and burst into the light. The room was a sea of gold, black silk, and the sparkling fire diamonds. The music of the violins was loud and happy, but to Zuri, it sounded like a storm. She began to run. She ran like something was chasing her. Her small, scuffed shoes slapped against a marble floor, a frantic beat that didn't match the slow, elegant music. Her arms pumped at her sides, and her white dress fluttered like a flag in the wind. Tears streamed down her face, so fast she could barely breathe between them. All she could see was her mother falling. All she could feel was the terror of being alone in this house of glass. The guests began to turn. Wealthy men and women froze with their crystal glasses halfway to their lips. They watched in shock as a small girl with a fluffy afro and a tear-stained face sprinted past them. She didn't look at the beautiful decorations. She didn't look for the exit. She ran straight for the center table. She ran to the man everyone else found a reason to walk away from. Kang-Jun sat in his black suit, his face like a mask of cold stone. He was surrounded by the most powerful people in the city, but he looked completely alone. He held a glass of mineral water, his dark eyes moving slowly across the room, missing nothing. Zuri didn't slow down. She reached the table and threw herself forward, her small hands grabbing the lapels of his expensive silk jacket. The fabric bunched under her fingers. She leaned her forehead against his shoulder, her body shaking with sobs that tore through the quiet of the room. "Please," she wailed, her voice cracking the silence like a mirror hitting the floor. "Please, they're beating my mama." The room didn't just go silent. It stopped breathing. 42 of Seoul's most powerful people sat completely motionless. The violin stopped playing. The only sound was the jagged, painful breathing of a 6-year-old girl. Kang-Jun didn't push her away. He didn't move for a long, heavy second. Then he slowly set his glass down on the table. The clink of the crystal sounded like a final judgment. He looked down at Zuri, and then his eyes shifted to the doorway. Nia had followed her daughter, leaning against a frame for support. Her face was pale, and she was cradling her arm. The sleeve of her uniform was pushed up, revealing the angry, red handprints where He-Jin had gripped her, and the dark bruise forming on her shoulder from fall. Kang-Jun stood up, He was tall, and the way he moved made the air in the room feel 20 degrees colder. He didn't look at the guests. He didn't look at the waiters. He looked at Nia's arm, and his jaw tightened until it looked like it was made of iron. Hee-Jean stepped into the ballroom then, her gold dress shimmering, her face twisted in a fake look of worry. "June! Honey! The child is making a scene," she started, her voice high and nervous. But she stopped when Kang-Jun turned his head. For the first time in 2 years, Hee-Jean saw the Ice King truly look at her. It wasn't the look of a fiancé. It was the look of a man who had just seen someone break his most important law. The silence in the hall was total, heavy with the knowledge that everything was about to change. The ballroom was so quiet, you could hear the soft drip of wax from the tall candles. Kang-Jun stood like a mountain of ice, his hand resting gently on Zuri's head. He did not yell. He did not lose his temper. Instead, he looked at Hee-Jean with eyes that made her step back until her heels hit the edge of a flower display. "June, please," Hee-Jean whispered, her voice shaking. "She's just a servant." She was being difficult. "I was only trying to keep things perfect for our big night." Kang-Jun finally spoke. His voice was low, but it carried to every corner of the room. "You think perfection is built on bruises?" He looked at the powerful guests, the bankers, and the leaders who were all watching. "You all came here to celebrate a union, but tonight you will see a different kind of ending." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. With a few quick taps, the giant video screens on the ballroom walls flickered to life. These screens usually showed beautiful pictures of the city, but now they showed something else. It was the security footage from the servants' corridor. The guests gasped as they saw the truth in high definition. They saw Hee-Jean's face twist with hate. They saw her grab Nia's arm. They saw the shove that sent a hard-working woman crashing into a stone wall. Hee-Jean's face turned as white as paper. "Turn it off!" she screamed, but no one moved. Kang-Jun looked at a man sitting at the front table. "Mr. Choi, you are the head of the fashion board, correct? I believe Hee-Jean's new clothing line needs your approval." The man nodded slowly, his eyes full of disgust for the woman in the gold dress. "That approval is gone," he said clearly. "We do not work with people like this." Kang-Jun turned to another guest. "And the bank? The loans for her family's business?" "Canceled by morning," the woman replied, setting her glass down with a final thud. In less than 5 minutes, the life Hee-Jean had built was falling apart. Kang-Jun didn't need to lift a finger. He used his words and his power to show the world exactly who she was. He was stripping away her money, her fame, and her pride in front of everyone she wanted to impress. She had tried to make Nia and Zuri feel like dirt, but now she was the one standing alone in a room full of people who wouldn't even look at her. "Mr. Park," Kang-Jun said, looking at the head of security, "escort her out. She is never to step foot on this property again. Her things will be sent to her in boxes." Hee-Jean tried to speak, but Mr. Park moved forward like a wall of iron. He didn't touch her, but his presence was enough. She walked out of the ballroom, her gold dress no longer shimmering, but looking dull and heavy. When the doors closed behind her, the Ice King did something no one expected. He turned to Nia, who was still standing by the door. He walked across the marble floor, the most powerful man in Seoul moving toward a housekeeper. "I am sorry," he said. It was just 3 words, but the hall went silent again. He looked at Nia's bruised arm, and then down at Zuri, who was still holding onto his hand. The reckoning was over. The shadow was gone. For the first time, the Sky Estate didn't feel like a fortress of glass. It felt like a place where the light was finally allowed to stay. Spring arrived at the Sky Estate with a burst of color that the cold marble could no longer hide. The cherry blossom trees in the east garden dropped soft, pink petals onto grass like nature's own confetti. The heavy, frozen silence that used to rule the mansion was gone, replaced by the sound of a distant radio playing in the kitchen and the chirping of birds that finally felt welcome. Nia sat on a bench nearby, her arm healed and her heart at peace. She watched as the 2 people who had changed the world together sat in the center of the garden. Zuri was sitting cross-legged on a soft blanket, her white dress spread out around her. Her notebook was open to a fresh, clean page. Beside her, with his expensive suit jacket tossed onto the grass and his white shirt sleeves rolled up, sat Kang-Jun. The Ice King, was no longer sitting at a high table looking down at the city. He was sitting on the ground, right where the dirt and the grass met the sky. The wings are the hardest part, Zuri explained, her voice full of serious concentration. She handed him a bright green pencil. You have to make them look like they can catch the wind, or the dragon will just fall down. Kang-Jun took the pencil with a steady hand. He looked at the paper with the same focus he used to use for multi-million-dollar deals. He carefully drew a curved line, following Zuri's instructions. He wasn't a perfect artist. His dragon's wings were a bit crooked and his tail was far too long. But for the first time in his life, he didn't care about being perfect. Like this? He asked, looking at the 6-year-old for approval. Zuri leaned in, her fluffy afro puffs brushing against his shoulder. She studied his work for a long moment, then nodded. Yes, that looks like a dragon that knows how to protect a castle. She reached into her pocket and pulled out 2 strawberry candies. She handed one to him, and they both unwrapped the red paper at the same time. The sweet, simple taste filled the air. You know, Zuri said, looking up at the tall glass towers of the mansion, the garden feels bigger now. Kang-Jun looked at the house that used to be a fortress of isolation. He thought about the boy he used to be, the one who watched his mother work from the shadows, and the man he had become. He realized that a crown isn't something made of gold that you wear on your head. A crown is a responsibility to make sure the people under your roof feel safe and loved. He looked at Zuri and then at Nia. He wasn't just a boss anymore, and they weren't just a help. They were the heartbeat of his home. He picked up a purple pencil and began to add scales to the dragon's back. The most feared man in Seoul was finally at rest. He wasn't guarding the gates. He was living inside them. As the sun began to set, casting a golden light over the garden, the dragon in the drawing was finished. It was a dragon that wasn't standing in front of anyone to hide them, but standing beside them to walk with them. The Ice King had finally melted, and in his place was a man who knew that the greatest power in the world wasn't fear. It was the trust of a child with a strawberry candy and a dream.